The merciless Arizona sun beat down upon the red canyons, turning the very air into a shimmering mirage. Rachel Riggs wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, careful not to lower the old Winchester rifle that had become an extension of her arm these past 2 years. Her faded blue cotton dress, once a Sunday best, now hung loosely on her frame, patched in a dozen places and stained with the red dust that seemed to seep into everything. 2 years. 2 years since Thomas had kissed her goodbye, mounted his horse and ridden away with the 5th Cavalry. 2 years of letters that grew increasingly sporadic until they stopped altogether 8 months ago. She'd heard rumors from passing traders, campaigns against hostile tribes, ambushes in mountain passes, entire patrols vanishing without a trace. Dead or alive, it makes no difference now, Rachel whispered to herself, a habit born of solitude. The land doesn't care, and neither can I. She crouched, examining the faint imprints in the sandy soil. Rabbit tracks, fresh from before dawn. Her stomach growled at the prospect of meat, something more substantial than the meager vegetables from her struggling garden and the prickly pear fruit she'd harvested yesterday. Rachel followed the tracks with practiced eyes, moving silently between towering saguaros and sprawling mesquite trees. The morning heat intensified with each passing minute, and she knew the window for hunting would close soon, as the creatures of the desert retreated to their burrows and shaded refuges. The tracks led her farther from her cabin than she'd intended, winding through a narrow wash between 2 rust-colored cliffs. She hesitated, glancing back over her shoulder. Apaches had been reported in these canyons. Not that she'd seen any herself, but Mason Fletcher at the trading post 40 miles east had warned her repeatedly. "A woman alone has no business out here," he'd told her last time she'd made the journey for supplies. "Indians or no Indians, it ain't natural. You ought to come stay in town, find yourself a new husband, or work taking in laundry." Rachel had thanked him for his concern with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The solitude suited her now. After watching her parents die of fever back in Missouri, then losing Thomas to the frontier, she'd grown comfortable with silence as her only companion. At least the desert was honest in its harshness. A movement caught her eye, and Rachel froze. There, perhaps 30 yards ahead where the wash widened into a small clearing, a cottontail rabbit nibbled tentatively at the base of a flowering ocotillo. She raised her rifle slowly, steadying her breathing as Thomas had taught her. But before she could squeeze the trigger, a whistling sound cut through the air and the rabbit collapsed, an arrow protruding from its side. Rachel dropped to a crouch, pressing herself against the canyon wall, heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't alone. From the opposite side of the clearing, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall and lean, moving with the silent grace of a mountain lion. A man with copper skin and long black hair, wearing buckskin leggings and a vest that left his muscled arms bare. An Apache warrior, his obsidian eyes scanning the area with predatory awareness. Rachel raised her rifle, finger trembling against the trigger. At this distance she couldn't miss. The man, this enemy, this savage if the stories were to be believed, bent to retrieve his kill, unaware of her presence. One squeeze and the threat would be eliminated. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the way he moved with such perfect harmony with the landscape, or the careful respect with which he lifted the rabbit, whispering words she couldn't understand. Or perhaps it was simple recognition of another solitary soul, surviving as she was, one day at a time. The warrior stiffened suddenly, turning his head in her direction. Their eyes met across the clearing, hers wide with fear, his narrowing in surprise. For an eternal moment they remained frozen, 2 predators assessing one another. With deliberate slowness he reached for the bow slung across his back. Rachel's finger tightened on the trigger, but instead of nocking an arrow, the warrior placed his bow on the ground. Then, maintaining eye contact, he set the rabbit beside it. He straightened, took 3 steps backward, and raised his empty palms. Rachel's breathing faltered. This wasn't what she'd expected, what all the stories of savage raids and merciless attacks had prepared her for. The warrior's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes, a wariness, an intelligence, perhaps even a curiosity, kept her from firing. She lowered her rifle a fraction, just enough to signal understanding without surrendering her ability to defend herself. The warrior nodded once, a barely perceptible movement, then melted back into the shadows of the canyon wall, disappearing as silently as he had appeared. Only when she was certain he had gone did Rachel approach, rifle still at the ready. The rabbit lay beside the bow, a simple weapon of sinew and wood yet crafted with obvious skill. She reached for the rabbit, then hesitated, her hand hovering above the bow. Taking it would be theft. Leaving it would be… What? An acknowledgement? A connection she wasn't sure she wanted to forge. After a moment's deliberation, Rachel took only the rabbit, backing away as the warrior had done. As she turned to leave, a sensation prickled between her shoulder blades, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. She didn't look back, maintaining what dignity she could as she retraced her steps toward her cabin. Only when the familiar weathered structure came into view did she allow her shoulders to relax, though her mind remained turbulent with questions. That night, as she roasted the rabbit over her small fire, Rachel found herself gazing toward the canyons, wondering about the warrior with the inscrutable eyes. Enemy or not, he had shown her mercy, or perhaps merely curiosity. Either way, their paths had crossed and parted without bloodshed, a rarity in this unforgiving land, where different worlds collided with typically violent results. "Fool woman," she muttered to herself, turning the spit. "One decent Indian doesn't make them all friendly." Yet as she ate her first proper meal in days, she couldn't shake the memory of those dark eyes, so full of the same wary solitude she saw each morning in her cracked mirror. Toro moved like shadow through the canyons, he knew as intimately as the lines on his palms. These were the sacred places of his people, the Ndi, though the white men called them Apache. Every ridge and ravine, every spring and cave had been known to his ancestors for generations beyond counting. He had not expected to find a white woman hunting alone in these remote canyons. Most of their kind clustered in settlements or military outposts, the men bringing destruction, the women bringing their strange notions of proper living. But this one had been different, thin and weathered by the sun, moving with the cautious attention of someone who had learned to respect the desert's dangers, and she had not shot him when she could have. Toro crouched by a small spring, cupping the cool water in his hands. His decision to leave his bow had been impulsive, unlike him. The elders of his band would have called it foolish, but he had grown weary of death, of the endless cycle of violence between his people and the blue-coated soldiers with their speaking guns. That was why he had chosen to separate from his band 3 moons ago, seeking solitude rather than continued battle. Not from fear. He had counted coup many times and earned his name in a fight with a bull that had gored his horse and nearly taken his life. But something in him hungered for a different path than the one that seemed inevitable for his people. Now, as the stars emerged in the vast sky above, Toro found his thoughts returning to the white woman's eyes, blue as the summer sky, yet hard as flint. Eyes that had seen suffering, that understood survival. Eyes not unlike his own. The next morning, before the sun breached the eastern horizon, Toro tracked a deer through the scrubland. The kill was clean, and he butchered the animal with practiced efficiency, setting aside a portion of the meat. The woman's cabin lay 3 miles to the west, a ramshackle structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. He had observed it from a distance before, noting the struggling garden, the lean-to stable empty of horses, the smoke from a chimney that spoke of solitary meals. Moving with the caution of one entering enemy territory, Toro approached the cabin as dawn broke. No movement from within, though a thin trail of smoke indicated the occupant was present. He circled the structure, assessing it from all angles, before silently crossing the open ground to the rough-hewn door. There, he placed the deer meat wrapped in leaves, retreating immediately to the cover of a large boulder 50 yards away. He would observe, learn more about this unusual white woman who hunted alone and showed mercy to her supposed enemy. Inside the cabin, Rachel stirred at the sound of a slight thud against her door. Instantly alert, she reached for the rifle propped beside her bed, her heart racing. Frontier life had taught her to be prepared for anything, wild animals, drifters, or worse. She approached the door cautiously, listening for any sound of movement outside. Hearing nothing, she eased it open a crack, rifle at the ready. Her eyes dropped to the ground, widening at the sight of the fresh meat wrapped in broad green leaves. Rachel glanced up, scanning the landscape with renewed wariness. No one in sight, yet she felt certain she was being watched. Her gaze settled on a large boulder in the distance. and though she could discern no shape or movement, instinct told her the Apache warrior was there. Instead of retreating inside, Rachel slowly leaned her rifle against the doorframe, still within easy reach but no longer pointed outward in threat. She crouched to pick up the offering, examining it in the golden light of dawn. "Thank you," she called out, her voice sounding strange to her own ears after so many days of silence. No response came, not that she'd expected one. Yet as she stood in her doorway, holding the gift of meat that would sustain her for days, Rachel felt the first fragile thread of connection stretch across the emptiness that had surrounded her for so long. Neither could know that this moment, a tentative exchange between two solitary souls, would alter the course of their lives more profoundly than any battle or decree could ever hope to do. For 3 weeks, they maintained their unusual arrangement. Toro would leave small offerings near Rachel's cabin, fresh meat, sometimes medicinal herbs or rabbit skins, and withdraw to watch from a distance. Rachel began leaving items in return: a small sack of coffee beans, a metal knife she'd sharpened to a fine edge, once even a book of poetry she'd brought from her former life, its pages yellowed and dog-eared. They never spoke, never acknowledged each other directly, yet each gift formed a word in a language they were creating between them, a language of mutual respect and growing curiosity. Rachel found herself anticipating these exchanges with an eagerness that both comforted and alarmed her. How strange to feel connection with a man from a people she'd been taught to fear, a man whose name she didn't even know. On the 23rd day, as summer heat gave way to the first hints of autumn coolness, everything changed. Rachel had ventured to the small creek that ran a quarter-mile from her cabin, carrying her meager laundry. As she knelt by the water, scrubbing a stubborn stain from her apron, a rattlesnake slithered from beneath a nearby rock. Disturbed by her movements, she saw it too late. The snake struck, fangs sinking into her forearm before she could recoil. Rachel cried out, more in surprise than pain, though the burning sensation followed instantly. She stumbled backward, clutching her arm as the snake retreated, its warning rattle filling the air. "No," she gasped, watching as the puncture wounds began to swell. No. Alone, miles from help, with venom coursing through her veins, Rachel knew the gravity of her situation. She needed to return to her cabin, to the small kit of medicines she'd accumulated. But as she tried to stand, dizziness swept over her, and she collapsed back to her knees. The world tilted and spun. Rachel fought to remain conscious, knowing that surrendering to the encroaching darkness might mean never waking again. She began to crawl, each movement sending waves of fire through her arm. She hadn't gone 10 yards when strong hands gripped her shoulders. Through vision that was already beginning to blur, she looked up into the face of the Apache warrior. He spoke words she couldn't understand, his voice deep and urgent. Then, seeming to realize the futility of speech, he lifted her as easily as if she were a child. Rachel wanted to protest, to maintain the independence that had kept her alive these 2 years, but the venom made her thoughts scattered and slow. She felt herself being carried, the steady rhythm of the warrior's heartbeat against her cheek, as her head rested against his chest. "Cabin," she managed to whisper, pointing weakly. "Medicine." But he wasn't taking her to the cabin. Instead, he moved with swift purpose toward the higher reaches of the canyon. Rachel tried to struggle, but her limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. "Please," she murmured, darkness encroaching at the edges of her vision. "Please." The last thing she remembered was the warrior's voice, low and calm, speaking words that somehow conveyed reassurance, despite her inability to understand them. Rachel awakened to firelight and the smell of burning herbs. For a moment, she lay disoriented, staring up at a ceiling of rock. Pain throbbed dully in her arm, but the terrible burning and paralysis had receded. She turned her head slowly, taking in her surroundings. A cave, small but deep, its entrance partially concealed by hanging brush. A fire burned in a stone-lined pit, its smoke rising toward a natural chimney in the rock above. And beside the fire, cross-legged and watchful, sat the Apache warrior. He leaned forward when he saw her eyes open, offering a wooden cup filled with dark liquid. When she hesitated, he took a small sip himself, then extended it to her again. Rachel struggled to sit up, accepting the cup with her uninjured hand. The liquid was bitter but not unpleasant, tasting of earth and plant medicine. She drank cautiously at first, then more deeply as her parched throat demanded relief. "Thank you," she said when she had finished, her voice hoarse. The warrior nodded, reaching for her injured arm. Rachel allowed him to examine it, noting with surprise that the swelling had decreased considerably. A poultice of crushed plants covered the puncture wounds, secured with strips of clean cloth. "You saved my life," she said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since their encounter in the canyon weeks ago. "Snake medicine strong," he replied in heavily accented English, surprising her. "You strong woman. Live." "You speak English," Rachel said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. A shadow crossed his face. "Learn from missionary school. Long ago, before war." An awkward silence fell between them, the weight of their people's conflict hanging in the air unspoken. "My name is Rachel," she offered finally. "Rachel Riggs." He seemed to consider this, as if deciding whether to reciprocate. "My people call me Toro," he said at last. "It means bull," Rachel finished for him. At his raised eyebrow, she explained, "I've traded with Mexican travelers, learned some Spanish." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Spanish name. From fight with bull when young. Foolish fight." Rachel found herself smiling in return, the expression feeling strange on her face after so long. "Thank you, Toro, for the gifts these past weeks, and for this." She gestured to her treated arm. He nodded once, then rose fluidly to tend the fire. "Rest. Night comes. Tomorrow, I take you home." As darkness fell outside the cave, Rachel watched Toro move about his temporary dwelling. Everything he did carried an economy of motion, a purposefulness that spoke of deep connection to the rhythms of survival. He was nothing like the savage caricatures she'd heard described in town, nor was he anything like Thomas or the other white men she'd known. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. "We're supposed to be enemies." Toro paused in his work, regarding her thoughtfully. "I watch you. Many days. You fight to live like me. You respect the land, not try to own it." He gestured to the open space beyond the cave. "Out there we are just two who wish to live free." His words resonated within her, articulating something she'd felt but never named. Here in the wilderness, stripped of society's expectations and prejudices, they were simply two souls seeking survival, and perhaps something more. "My husband went away with the cavalry," Rachel found herself saying, 2 years ago. "Fighting your people, I suppose." She looked down at her hands. "No word for 8 months now, probably dead." "Many dead," Toro said quietly. "Your people. My people. The land remembers all blood." He added another stick to the fire, shadows dancing across his stoic features. "I leave my band, too much fighting, too much death. Some say I betray them. I say I choose different path." "It's not easy being alone," Rachel said softly. Toro looked at her then, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes, this I know." He hesitated, then added, "Until I see you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was prepared to fully acknowledge. Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire or her injury. "You should sleep," Toro said, breaking the moment. "Medicine will work in dreams." He arranged a bed of soft hides for her near the fire, then retreated to the opposite side of the cave, giving her space. Rachel lay down, expecting sleep to elude her in these strange surroundings with this even stranger companion. But exhaustion and the herbs in the medicine pulled her swiftly into darkness. She dreamed of running through canyons that seemed to breathe, of stars that sang overhead, and of a figure always just ahead, leading her towards something she couldn't name but desperately wanted to find. Dawn found them walking side by side along a narrow trail, the silence between them comfortable now, no longer charged with suspicion. Rachel's arm ached dully, but the worst effects of the venom had passed, thanks to Toro's swift action and knowledge of healing plants. As her cabin came into view, Rachel felt an unexpected reluctance to return to her solitary existence. These past hours with Toro had awakened something she'd thought long dead, the simple pleasure of human connection. They paused at the edge of the clearing, the unspoken question of what came next hanging between them. "I should check your wound again tomorrow," Toro said finally, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "Snake poison sometimes returns." Rachel recognized the statement for what it was, an offer to continue whatever this tentative relationship might be called. "I would appreciate that," she replied, unable to keep a small smile from her lips. As Toro turned to leave, she impulsively caught his arm. He went still beneath her touch, looking down at her hand on his skin, then up to her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Near you, I lose myself," he said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as her. "This is dangerous thing." Before Rachel could respond, he gently removed her hand and disappeared into the scrub brush, leaving her standing alone before her cabin, her heart beating a rhythm unfamiliar yet undeniable. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the coyotes call in the distance, Rachel whispered his words into the darkness. "Near you, I lose myself." The danger he spoke of was real, for both of them. Yet for the first time in 2 years, she felt truly alive. Autumn painted the desert in subtle hues of gold and amber, as days shortened and nights grew cooler. Rachel and Toro's cautious friendship deepened with each passing week, evolving into something neither could name, but both increasingly cherished. Toro taught Rachel to move silently through the canyons, to read the desert signs more clearly than she'd managed on her own. She shared with him stories from the books she treasured, tales of places beyond the horizon that sparked his curiosity and respect for her knowledge. They spoke of their pasts in fragments, each revelation a gift of trust. Toro told of his childhood before the wars intensified, of learning the sacred ways of his people alongside the white man's language at the missionary school. Rachel described her journey west with Thomas, their dreams of a fresh start after the epidemic that claimed her parents, her loneliness since his departure. They never touched, save for necessary moments when Toro checked her healing snakebite or steadied her across treacherous terrain. Yet something powerful grew between them, evident in lingering glances and conversations that stretched from dawn until dusk. On a crisp October morning, Rachel was tending her garden when the distant sound of hoofbeats froze her in place. Visitors were rare in this remote stretch of territory and rarely welcome. She reached for her rifle, propped against the cabin wall, scanning the horizon. 3 riders approached from the east, following the crude trail that connected to the main route 40 miles away. As they drew closer, Rachel's heart sank. She recognized Mason Fletcher's stocky form in the lead, followed by 2 men she didn't know. Fletcher had made his interest in her clear during her infrequent visits to his trading post, his offers of protection growing more insistent each time. She'd rebuffed him consistently, but the man's persistence bordered on obsession. "Morning, Widow Riggs," Fletcher called as they reined in before her cabin. His eyes took in her garden, the improved condition of her cabin's roof, the fresh deer hide stretched on a frame nearby. "Seems you're doing mighty well for yourself out here all alone." Rachel nodded curtly, keeping her rifle visible, but not aimed. "What brings you this way, Mr. Fletcher?" "I wasn't planning to trade until next month." Fletcher dismounted, adjusting his belt with its prominent pistol. "Thought I'd check on you, being a good Christian neighbor and all." He gestured to his companions. "This here's Sergeant Willis and Corporal Taylor up from Fort Grant. They're sweeping the territory, hunting hostiles." The soldiers nodded, their eyes cold and assessing as they surveyed the area. The older one, Willis, spoke up. "Ma'am, we've had reports of Apache activity in these canyons. Dangerous for a woman alone." Rachel kept her expression neutral with effort. "I haven't been troubled." Fletcher's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's so, because Hiram Johnson swears he saw smoke from more than one fire coming from your direction last week when he was hunting up in the North Ridge." "I've been smoking meat for winter," Rachel replied evenly. "Perhaps that's what he saw." "Perhaps," Fletcher said, unconvinced. He gestured toward her arm where the faded puncture marks from the snakebite were still visible. "What happened there?" "Rattlesnake. I was careless." "And you treated it yourself?" The younger soldier, Taylor, spoke up, doubt clear in his voice. "Most folks don't survive a rattler bite out here alone." "I've learned a thing or two about desert remedies," Rachel said, her throat tightening with anxiety. "God was merciful." Fletcher exchanged glances with the soldiers, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Rachel, there's talk. People wondering how you're managing so well out here by yourself. Some say you might have help." The implication hung in the air, ugly and threatening. Rachel's grip tightened on her rifle. "My husband taught me well before he left," she said coldly. And I'd thank you to stop spreading gossip that could get an innocent woman killed. Willis stepped forward, his weathered face stern. Ma'am, harboring hostiles is a crime against the United States government. If you know something about Apache movements in this area, it's your duty to inform us. As I said, I haven't been troubled, Rachel repeated, meeting his gaze steadily. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Fletcher wasn't ready to leave. We're patrolling these canyons for the next week. Military's offering bounties for information leading to hostile camps. His eyes gleamed with avarice. $20 per brave captured, $50 for a chief or medicine man. Rachel felt sick at the casual cruelty of it. I wish you luck elsewhere, gentlemen. This land's been peaceful for me. After a tense moment, Willis nodded to his companion. We'll be moving on, Mrs. Riggs, but we'll check back. Fort Grant takes the Indian problem seriously. As they mounted their horses, Fletcher lingered, leaning down from his saddle. I'll be back in 3 days, Rachel, alone. Think about what I said. Woman like you needs protection out here. Proper protection. His gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. I'm a patient man, but my patience has limits. Only when the dust from their horses had settled did Rachel allow herself to tremble, sinking to her knees in the garden she'd tended with Toro's guidance. They had suspected, if not known, and they would return. She had to warn him. Toro materialized from the shadows as twilight descended, his approach so silent that Rachel, despite all he had taught her, didn't hear him until he spoke her name softly from the edge of the clearing. Rachel. She whirled, relief flooding through her. Toro, thank the heavens. Soldiers came today with Mason Fletcher from the trading post. They know someone's been helping me. Toro's expression darkened. I saw, watched from the high ridge. He moved closer, his usual caution abandoned in the urgency of the moment. They hunt my people. Many soldiers moving through canyons now. Fletcher's coming back in 3 days, Rachel said, her voice tight with worry. Alone. He wants me to be his woman. Has for months. Something dangerous flashed in Toro's eyes. This man threatens you? Not directly, but he won't take no for an answer much longer. She hesitated, then added, the soldiers are offering bounties. For capturing Apache. Toro's face became impassive, the mask he wore when speaking of the conflicts between their peoples. I must go. Not safe here now. Go where? Rachel asked, unexpected panic rising in her chest at the thought of his departure. North, to mountains. Winter comes soon. He looked toward the distant peaks already dusted with early snow. Safer there, for now. Rachel felt as if the ground were shifting beneath her feet. The prospect of returning to complete solitude after these weeks of companionship seemed unbearable. Yet what alternative did they have? I'll miss our talks, she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. Toro studied her face in the fading light, something unspoken smoldering in his gaze. Come with me. The simple invitation stole her breath away. What? Come with me, he repeated more urgently now. Nothing here for you but danger. Fletcher will return. Others will come. Questions. Suspicion. He gestured to the barren landscape around her small cabin. This place gives little life. In mountains we survive winter together. Toro, Rachel faltered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was suggesting. I can't just leave everything. What everything? He asked gently. Dead husband, empty cabin? People who see you only as woman alone to be claimed or suspected? His words struck her with the force of truth. What did tie her to this place, beyond habit and the fear of change? Not loyalty to Thomas, who was almost certainly never returning, not attachment to white society, which had always treated her as an oddity at best, a target at worst. They would hunt us both, she whispered. If I went with you. Toro nodded, acknowledging the risk. Yes, but mountains are vast. I know places soldiers never find. He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. Rachel, near you I lose myself, but I find something better. The words unlocked something within her, a door she'd kept firmly shut since Thomas rode away, perhaps even before. Without thinking, she reached up to touch Toro's face, her pale fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. He went still beneath her touch, his breathing shallow. Then with infinite gentleness he covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press his lips against her palm. The simple gesture contained more tenderness than any words could express. Rachel felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sorrow but from the overwhelming recognition of what had grown between them against all odds. 3 days, she said finally, her decision made. I'll need 3 days to prepare, to gather what we can carry. Relief and something deeper transformed Toro's expression. 3 days. Then we go north, before first heavy snow. As the stars emerged overhead, they sat together on the rough-hewn bench outside Rachel's cabin, planning their departure in hushed voices. They would take only what was essential: food, medicines, tools, the warmest clothing she possessed. Toro would hunt and prepare extra meat. Rachel would collect and preserve the last of her garden's yield. In 3 days' time, when Fletcher returned expecting submission, he would find an empty cabin and cold ashes in the fireplace. And somewhere in the vast wilderness to the north, 2 souls who had found in each other what the world had denied them both, acceptance, understanding, and the fragile beginning of love, would forge a new path together. The 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Rachel sorted through her few possessions with ruthless practicality, selecting only what would serve them in the mountains: her sharpest knives, cooking utensils, medicines, seeds carefully wrapped in cloth, the warm quilt her mother had made for her wedding, Thomas's compass and maps. The rest, the china plates she'd carried all the way from Missouri, her Sunday dress, the small collection of books she treasured, she left behind, arranged neatly as if awaiting her return. Only one book made the cut, a slim volume of poetry that had sustained her through her darkest hours. Even survival required nourishment for the spirit, she reasoned, tucking it into her pack. Toro came and went like a shadow, bringing dried meat and herbs, teaching her how to make snowshoes from strips of rawhide and bent branches. They worked with quiet efficiency, the unspoken truth of what they were undertaking hanging between them. Not just a journey to safety, but a crossing of boundaries no one would understand or forgive. On the 3rd morning, Rachel awoke before dawn with a sense of finality. Today they would leave, beginning a new chapter neither of them could fully envision. She dressed warmly, braided her hair severely, and tucked the small gold locket containing a curl of her mother's hair beneath her clothing. As the first pale light filtered through her window, she heard the rumble of approaching hooves. Her heart jolted. Fletcher wasn't due until afternoon. She peered carefully through a crack in the shutters and froze at the sight of not 1 rider, but 5. Fletcher had returned early, and he hadn't come alone. Rachel grabbed her rifle, mind racing. Toro was due to meet her at noon by the northern creek, where they would begin their journey into the mountains. If Fletcher and his companions lingered, she might miss the rendezvous. Worse, if they searched the area and found Toro. A heavy knock rattled her door. "Rachel, open up, girl. Got some news you'll want to hear." She took a deep breath, composing her features into a mask of indifference before unbolting the door. Fletcher stood on her threshold, flanked by the 2 soldiers from before and 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize, bounty hunters, by the look of their gear and the scalps hanging from one man's belt. "Mr. Fletcher," she acknowledged coldly, "you're earlier than expected." Fletcher grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Couldn't wait to share the good news, Rachel. These boys found sign of a small Apache camp up in the North Canyons yesterday, fresh tracks leading this way." His eyes gleamed with malice. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Rachel kept her expression neutral. "As I told you before, I've seen no Indians." The older soldier, Willis, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we tracked a lone brave to within a mile of your cabin. Tracks show he's been coming this way regular-like." "My cabin sits near one of the few reliable water sources in these parts," Rachel replied evenly. "All manner of creatures pass nearby." "Creatures?" the bounty hunter with the scalp sneered. "That's about right for an Apache." Rachel's hand tightened on her rifle, though she kept it pointed downward. "What exactly do you want from me, gentlemen?" "Cooperation," Fletcher said, his false geniality wearing thin. "We aim to set a trap for this brave. These boys will hide out and wait for him to show himself." He gestured around her small homestead. "You'll go about your business as usual, and when he appears, as we know he will, they'll take him." Horror rose in Rachel's throat, but she swallowed it down. "And if I refuse to participate in this hunt?" Fletcher's expression hardened. "Then we'll have to wonder why a white woman would protect a savage over her own kind. Might make folks think you've gone native." He leaned closer. "They hang women for that, Rachel. The threat hung in the air, explicit and chilling. Rachel thought frantically, seeking any way to warn Toro of the danger. But the men were watching her too closely, their suspicions already aroused. "I've no interest in your Apache hunt," she said finally, "but I won't stop you from watching my property from a distance." She stepped back, attempting to close the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have chores to attend to." Fletcher's hand shot out, preventing the door from closing. "Not so fast. Boys, search the cabin." "You have no right," Rachel began, but Willis cut her off. "Military authority, ma'am. Indian wars give us certain liberties." The two soldiers pushed past her, rifling through her neatly packed belongings while the bounty hunters circled the outside of the cabin. Rachel stood rigid with fury and fear as they tossed aside the items she'd so carefully sorted, looking for evidence of her betrayal. "Well, well," said the younger soldier, Taylor, holding up her packed rucksack. "Planning a trip, Mrs. Riggs?" Fletcher snatched the bag, dumping its contents onto her table. "Provisions, warm clothing, medicines. Bit much for a day's journey to the trading post." His eyes narrowed. "You're running off with him, aren't you? Your Apache lover." "I have no lover," Rachel stated coldly, though her racing heart belied her calm exterior. "My husband may yet return. I was preparing to visit the settlement before winter sets in." "Liar," Fletcher hissed, grabbing her arm roughly. "I've watched you for months, turning down decent white men while you hide out here. Now I know why." "Take your hands off me," Rachel said, her voice low with warning. Instead, Fletcher's grip tightened painfully. "You're coming with us back to the settlement. The colonel at Fort Grant will be mighty interested to question a woman consorting with hostiles." Rachel's mind raced. If they took her away, Toro would come looking for her and walk straight into their trap. She had to find a way to warn him, even if it meant revealing the truth of their relationship. A commotion outside drew Fletcher's attention. One of the bounty hunters burst through the door, excitement evident on his weathered face. "Found fresh moccasin prints by the garden, and this—" He held up a small carving of an eagle, one Toro had given her as a token of protection. "Indian work, no doubt about it." Fletcher's face contorted with vindication and rage. "So much for your lies, Rachel." He turned to the others. "Change of plans. We don't wait for the brave to come to us. Reynolds, you and Keller stay here with Mrs. Riggs. Willis, Taylor, you're with me. We'll follow those tracks while they're fresh." "No!" Rachel cried, unable to contain her desperation. She lunged for her rifle, but Fletcher was faster, striking her across the face with such force that she stumbled backward into the table. "Tie her up," he ordered the bounty hunter called Reynolds. "If she makes a sound, gag her." As rough hands bound her wrists, Rachel fought with every ounce of strength she possessed. "He's done nothing to you. Nothing to anyone." Fletcher paused at the door, a cruel smile twisting his features. "So there is an he. Thank you for confirming it, my dear." He touched the pistol at his hip. "Don't worry, I'll bring you a souvenir. Maybe his scalp for your wedding gift once you come to your senses." The door slammed behind him, leaving Rachel with the two bounty hunters. The one called Reynolds finished binding her to a chair while Keller kept his rifle trained on her. "Ain't right," Keller muttered, almost to himself. "White woman taking up with an Indian." "You know nothing about him," Rachel said, tasting blood from her split lip. "Nothing about us." "Don't need to know," Reynolds replied, checking her bonds. "Just need to collect the bounty." Rachel fell silent, her mind working furiously. Toro was too skilled to be caught easily, but 3 armed men hunting specifically for him presented a grave danger. She needed to escape to reach their meeting place before Fletcher and his men found Toro's trail. Outside, she heard the hoofbeats of departing horses. Fletcher, Willis, and Taylor were heading north, following the traces Toro had inadvertently left behind. Time was running out. "Could I have some water?" she asked, forcing her voice to sound weak and defeated. "Please." Reynolds and Keller exchanged glances before the latter shrugged. "Ain't no harm in that, get her some." As Reynolds moved to the water bucket, Rachel began to cough violently, doubling over as much as her bonds would allow. "What's wrong with her?" Keller asked, taking a step closer. Rachel continued coughing, adding a wheeze for effect. "Can't breathe. Untie. Chest." Reynolds returned with the water, frowning. "Maybe loosen the ropes a bit. Fletcher wants her alive for questioning." Keller grudgingly moved behind her chair to adjust her bindings. The moment she felt the ropes slacken, Rachel exploded into action. She drove her head backward, connecting solidly with Keller's face. As he howled in pain, she kicked out at Reynolds, knocking the water into his eyes. In the seconds of confusion, Rachel wrenched one hand free and grabbed for the knife Keller wore at his belt. The blade came free in her grip, and she slashed at the remaining ropes binding her. Keller recovered first, lunging for her with blood streaming from his broken nose. Rachel dodged, bringing the knife up in a desperate arc that caught him across the forearm. He bellowed in rage and pain. Reynolds raised his rifle, but in the confined space of the cabin, he couldn't get a clear shot without risking his companion. "Drop the knife, woman!" Instead, Rachel kicked over the oil lamp on the table. Flames leapt across the wooden surface, catching on the papers and cloth scattered during the search. Smoke filled the small cabin instantly. In the ensuing chaos, Rachel darted for the door, knife still clutched in her hand. A shot rang out behind her, the bullet splintering the doorframe as she burst outside into the clear autumn air. Not pausing to look back, she ran for the small corral where the bounty hunter's horses were tethered. Behind her, shouts and curses indicated her pursuers were emerging from the smoke-filled cabin. Rachel slashed the corral rope and slapped the nearest horse hard on its flank. The animals bolted, further distracting Reynolds and Keller as they stumbled into the yard. She didn't wait to see more, but plunged into the scrub brush beyond her garden, running north toward the creek where Toro would be waiting. Her cabin was now sending a column of black smoke into the sky, a signal she hadn't intended, but which might serve as a warning to Toro if he saw it. Rachel ran as Toro had taught her, placing her feet carefully despite her haste, using terrain to conceal her passage. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she pushed herself beyond endurance. The sounds of pursuit faded behind her, but she knew Fletcher and the soldiers were ahead, following Toro's trail. She had to reach him first. Toro crouched by the creek, alert to every sound and movement in the canyon. Rachel was late. The sun had passed its zenith, yet there was no sign of her at their meeting place. Something was wrong. He felt it with the same instinct that had kept him alive through years of conflict. Rising silently, he moved to higher ground, seeking a vantage point from which to survey the approach to Rachel's cabin. What he saw froze his blood, a column of smoke rising from where her home stood, and the glint of rifle barrels moving through the brush a quarter-mile to the south of his position. Hunters, and they were following his trail. Toro melted back into the rocks, considering his options. The men below were experienced trackers, the same bounty hunters who had been harassing his people for months. If Rachel had been captured or harmed, the thought ignited a fury within him that threatened to overcome the caution of a lifetime. But rushing in blindly would help neither of them. A flash of movement in the scrub below caught his attention, not the methodical advance of the hunters, but a desperate flight through the underbrush. Rachel running full tilt toward their meeting place, her golden hair coming loose from its braid. Something clutched in her hand that caught the sunlight, and behind her, closing rapidly, Fletcher and the two soldiers. Toro moved without conscious thought, flowing down the rocky slope like water finding its path. He intercepted Rachel's flight, pulling her behind a large boulder as a rifle shot cracked through the air. "Toro!" she gasped, her face flushed with exertion and fear. "They know, they followed your tracks." "Hush," he said gently, wiping blood from her split lip with his thumb. The sight of her injury kindled his rage anew, but he contained it, focusing on their survival. "This way, quickly." He led her up a nearly invisible game trail that wound steeply into the canyon wall. Behind them, shouts indicated their pursuers had spotted them. "There! The Indian and the woman!" Another shot rang out, chipping stone near Toro's head. He pushed Rachel ahead of him, shielding her with his body as they scrambled upward. "I can't lead them to your winter shelter," Rachel panted as they paused in a small alcove. "They'll just keep hunting us." Toro nodded grimly. "We must lose them first. Then find another way north." He glanced at the knife she still gripped. "You fought well." "My cabin is burning," she said, a strange calm overtaking her features. "There's nothing left for me there now." "Nothing left for either of us here," Toro agreed. He peered around the edge of their hiding place. 3 men below. 2 more back at cabin, maybe following. Rachel touched his arm, her eyes fierce with determination. "I won't let them take you. I won't go back." In that moment, despite the danger closing in around them, Toro felt a surge of something profound, not just the desire to protect this remarkable woman, but recognition of how completely their fates had become intertwined. Whatever happened now, they would face it together. "There is a place," he said suddenly, "a hidden valley beyond the northern peaks. My grandfather showed me when I was a boy. No white man has found it." He clasped her hand. "But the journey is hard, dangerous." "More dangerous than staying here?" Rachel asked with a grim smile. A shout from below indicated their pursuers were beginning to ascend the trail. Time was running out. "Follow me," Toro said, leading her deeper into the maze of rock formations that crowned the canyon. "Step only where I step." They moved in perfect synchronicity, Rachel matching his movements with the precision born of their weeks hunting together. Toro led them through increasingly challenging terrain. Narrow ledges, steep climbs, passages so tight they had to remove their packs and push them ahead before squeezing through. Behind them, the voices of their pursuers grew more distant, more frustrated. At one point, a rifle shot echoed through the canyons, but it was fired blindly, the bullet whistling harmlessly into the sky. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Toro finally paused on a high ledge overlooking the vast wilderness to the north. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already white with early snow. "We've lost them for now," he said, allowing himself to breathe more deeply. "But they will not give up so easily." Rachel stood beside him, her face scratched and dirty, her hair wild around her shoulders, more beautiful to him than any woman he had ever known. "Then we'll stay ahead of them," she said simply. "All the way to your hidden valley, if that's what it takes." Toro studied her face, searching for any sign of doubt or regret. He found none, only the same quiet strength that had first drawn him to her. "The way will be hard. Winter comes early in the high country." "I'm stronger than I look," Rachel replied, a hint of her rare smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "And I have a good teacher." The fading sunlight caught the gold in her hair, transforming it into a crown of fire. Toro reached out, gently tucking a strand behind her ear, allowing his fingers to linger against her cheek. "Near you, I lose myself," he murmured, repeating the words that had become a truth between them. "But I find something better." Rachel leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "What do you find, Toro?" "Home," he said simply. "Not a place. A feeling, I thought, lost forever." Without hesitation, Rachel stepped closer, eliminating the last space between them. Her hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I felt dead inside for so long," she whispered. "Until you." The setting sun bathed them in golden light as their lips met for the first time, a gentle, questioning touch that deepened into certainty. In that kiss, worlds collided, not in violence, but in harmony. Two souls recognizing in each other what society would never understand or accept. When they finally parted, the first stars were appearing in the eastern sky. Toro took Rachel's hand, leading her toward a sheltered overhang where they could safely spend the night. "Tomorrow we begin the journey north," he said, spreading his blanket in the small space. "It will take many days to reach the hidden valley." "And when we get there?" Rachel asked, settling beside him, her body fitting perfectly against his, as if created for this purpose. Toro gazed toward the distant mountains, imagining the secluded paradise that awaited them, the clear lake, the protected meadows rich with game, the natural hot springs that would ward off winter's chill. "We live," he said simply. "We build a home. Together." Rachel rested her head against his shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her, now that immediate danger had passed. "Together," she echoed, the word holding all the promise either of them needed. As full darkness descended, Toro kept watch, one arm protectively around the woman who had crossed every boundary to be at his side. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of campfires, their pursuers, still searching, still determined. But for the first time since he could remember, Toro felt no fear of what lay ahead. The path would be challenging, the dangers real. Yet with Rachel beside him, he had found something worth any risk, any sacrifice. In the heart of the night, under stars that had witnessed countless human struggles, two souls had found in each other what the world had denied them both: acceptance, understanding, and love that transcended every barrier. As Rachel slept in his arms, Toro whispered a prayer of gratitude to the spirits of his ancestors. The journey ahead was long, but they would face it as they now faced everything, together, two halves of a whole that had defied impossible odds to find each other. 6 months later, spring brought new life to the hidden valley nestled high in the northern mountains. Snow still capped the surrounding peaks, but in the protected basin, wildflowers had begun to carpet the meadows in brilliant hues of purple, yellow, and white. Beside the clear lake that formed the valley's heart stood a sturdy cabin, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Nearby, a corral held 2 horses, one a sturdy Mustang Toro had tamed during the winter, the other a mare they had traded for with a peaceful band of Shoshone who occasionally visited the valley. Rachel emerged from the cabin, her golden hair longer now and braided with strips of colored cloth in the Apache style. Her face, once pale and drawn with loneliness, now glowed with health and happiness. The life she and Toro had built together over the harsh winter months had proven more fulfilling than any she had known before. She shaded her eyes, searching for Toro's form among the trees at the valley's edge. He had gone hunting at dawn, promising to return by midday. As if summoned by her thoughts, he appeared from the forest, a string of rabbits over one shoulder, his stride confident and free. Rachel's heart quickened at the sight of him, the same reaction he had inspired since those first tentative exchanges outside her desert cabin. Some things, it seemed, would never change, nor did she want them to. "Good hunting?" she called as he approached. Toro smiled, the expression coming more easily to him now that they had found safety and peace. "Always good hunting in this valley. The spirits blessed this place." He laid his catch aside and drew her into his arms, his dark eyes warm with love as they gazed down into hers. "And they blessed me with you." Rachel rose on tiptoe to kiss him, still marveling at the happiness they had found far from the world that would have kept them apart. Here in their hidden valley, they were bound by no laws but those of nature and their own hearts. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it against her abdomen, still flat but holding their most precious secret. "By autumn's end, there will be 3 of us in this valley." Wonder transformed Toro's features as he understood her meaning. He knelt before her, pressing his forehead gently against where their child grew within her. "A new life," he whispered, "born of 2 worlds." Rachel ran her fingers through his long black hair, tears of joy welling in her eyes. Her child who will know only love, not hatred, who will see the beauty in both sides of their heritage. Toro rose, gathering her in his arms with infinite tenderness. "Our child will be free, as we are now free. This I promise." As the spring sun warmed their faces, Rachel and Toro stood embraced before the home they had built together, not just the physical shelter of logs and stone, but the deeper sanctuary they had created in each other's hearts. Far behind them lay the world of prejudice and violence, of arbitrary boundaries and cruel judgments. Before them stretched a future bright with possibility, a love that had transcended every obstacle, and the promise of a new generation that would embody the best of both their worlds. "Near you I lose myself," Toro whispered, the words now a cherished ritual between them. "And find something better," Rachel completed, her voice full of certainty and joy. In the hidden valley high among the mountains, where the wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, 2 souls who had once been lost in solitude had found their true home, not in a place, but in each other. And that was a journey worth every step. In the rugged landscapes of the American West, where history often celebrates conquest over connection, "Near you I lose myself" invites us to imagine a different path, one where courage isn't measured by victories in battle, but by victories of the heart. Rachel and Toro's journey reminds us that the most profound acts of bravery are sometimes the quietest. Choosing love when the world demands hate, building bridges where others erect walls, and finding home in the wilderness of understanding another's soul. Their story speaks to the deepest American ideals that transcend our darker chapters: freedom to forge one's own destiny, courage to stand against injustice, and the profound belief that love, in its purest form, knows no boundaries of race, culture, or circumstance. As their child grows in that hidden valley, nurtured by 2 traditions and sheltered by unconditional love, we glimpse the promise of what America has always aspired to be at its best: Not a land divided by differences, but united by the recognition of our shared humanity. Perhaps in Rachel and Toro's embrace, in that cabin built by hands from two worlds, we find a mirror for our own modern struggles. A reminder that the bravest pioneers were not only those who claimed new territories, but those who dared to claim new understandings of what it means to truly see one another. And in that seeing, complete, unflinching, and filled with grace, lies our greatest hope for healing, both in the pages of our history and in the chapters yet to be written. For in losing ourselves near those different from us, we find something infinitely better, the America of our highest aspirations, where courage and compassion ride together across every frontier. With gratitude, Wild West whispers. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of Rachel and Toro's journey. We hope their story touched your heart as much as it touched ours. If it did, we would be truly grateful if you could like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything to us. It keeps us motivated to keep telling stories filled with love, redemption, and emotional twists. We'd love to hear where you're watching from and what you felt during this story, so please leave a comment below. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggested story from our channel. Click on it and get ready to be surprised by another emotional journey, just like this one. From our hearts to yours, thank you.